In this episode of Quakers Today, we ask, what does it mean to be welcomed?
Lisa Grosstein considers how Quaker meetings communicate whether they are welcoming or not. And Rhiannon Grant wonders if a Quaker community were a large household, who would be the owners, the family, the visitors, and the outliers? I'm Peterson Toscano.
And I'm Miche McCall. This is Season 3, Episode 3 of the Quakers Today podcast, a project of Friends Publishing Corporation. This season of Quakers Today is sponsored by the American Friends Service Committee.
Hey Miche, it's great to have you back talking about welcome and welcoming spaces. Do you feel welcome right now where you are?
I am currently under a blanket, so I can't think of a more safe and welcoming place for myself.
Which I know a lot of people think, what is that about? Why would you be under a blanket? But it is a classic move of podcaster and radio people when they're on the road. So where on the road are you?
Logrono in central northern Spain. I just finished my 7th day walking on the Camino de Santiago, which is a religious pilgrimage across all of Spain.
And it's a very international sort of thing. I know people come from all over the world. How are you feeling being there as an American, as a queer, non-binary American? How welcome are you?
I feel incredibly welcome by the people who are walking, though I feel separate from many people because of an aspect of my identity that's hard to explain when first meeting someone.
Lots of times people don't feel welcome in other countries, but particularly in religious spaces. Lots of people will see a all welcome sign in front of a church, but we know some restrictions apply and we know who we are. And we know that we may not genuinely be welcome. And that's what this episode is all about. And before we jump into it though, listener, we want you to know you are welcome, not only to listen to this podcast, but on our new social media channels, which we have created. So let's get to the program. I had the opportunity to speak with Rhiannon Grant, the Deputy Program Leader and Program Coordinator at Woodbrook. Woodbrook is an international Quaker learning and research center that's based in Britain. Rhiannon wrote an article for Friends Journal about welcoming spaces.
I am a Quaker. I grew up as a Quaker, so I'm a cradle Quaker, although not technically a birthright friend. I'm also a member of some other faith communities, so in particular I'm a Druid, a member of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. I'm in touch with the Buddhist community, the community of interbeing. I'm a woman, I'm a cis woman, I'm a white woman in the British context. I'm a middle-class woman. That can come over differently in other cultural contexts. I'm a queer woman, I'm bi, and I'm married to a woman. We got married in a Quaker wedding 3 years ago now. That's hard to believe that it's gone that quickly. If the Quaker community were a household, who would be the owners and who would be the guests? Even a small meeting is usually bigger than the nuclear family household we often picture today. So it might be useful to think about communal living, extended families, or the sort of large household described in 19th century novels. These groups often centre around a few people. A central couple, perhaps, or a core group who set things up. If your meeting was a big household, all living together, what would you feel your role to be? Are you an adult member of the core family, secure in your position and able to have a say in what happens? Perhaps you feel like a family member, but not part of the core, perhaps like a child or an in-law or a distant cousin, acknowledged but sometimes ignored, not taken seriously for whatever reason, and sometimes anxious about whether you can stay or not. Perhaps you know that you're a guest, only present on a temporary basis and happy with it. Perhaps you'd like to join the family, but get treated as a guest. Some big households have actual staff, and some treat certain members of the family like employees. There can be deeply ambiguous positions in such households. Senior staff might be said to feel like part of the family, but what looks one way to the family may not seem the same to the staff. I remember hearing someone speak in ministry, actually, about wanting to be friends. What does it mean that we're the religious society of friends? And what does it mean to really be friendly to one another? And I remember thinking then, friends is all well and good, but actually, when you come into membership, when you make a public lifelong commitment to a community, doesn't that take it to something deeper? And I guess I probably started thinking about family, or that was one of the things that put me on that track.
I'm curious about Quaker meetings. I mean, there's so many religious institutions, Christian churches, I think of in particular, that have these big, bold signs, all welcome. But we know that in some denominations and traditions, there are some exceptions that apply.
The people who are not welcome work that out quite quickly, usually, even if we aren't explicit about it. Definitely, I've heard stories, for example, about someone who was really involved in a Quaker community, but got comments like, "You don't dress like the rest of us, do you?" It might be true, but the way that it's said and the fact of that observation being important enough to someone to make it out loud shows up the ways in which someone is different, in that case, I think, along class lines, and people feel unwelcome. They draw their own conclusions from that sort of comment, usually rightly.
Again, I'm thinking broadly of various faith communities. There are tiers of welcome, right? There's different levels. So you may be welcome to sit in the pews or sit in the seats, but not welcome to serve.
I have sometimes been treated in ways that made me think people are reading my age as something that means they don't trust me as a responsible adult. I'm still a university student, even though I'm doing a PhD. And I've heard people say things like, "Well, so-and-so's very enthusiastic, but I'm not sure he's reliable." Do you mean that he's young? And yeah, there are lots of ways. Sexuality, but also age, people's assumptions about gender and what kinds of roles are associated with different gender presentations and things. They are all factors in what kinds of service we're offered.
How do theological diversity and personal beliefs impact the sense of belonging or exclusion within the Quaker community? And can you provide an example of how these tensions have been navigated?
We can see it as a richness. We can see it as threatening. People often feel that sense of not wanting to share your whole self, not feeling that maybe you're really welcome. And I think that can happen around theological diversity. I do hear stories from people who say, "Well, I'm really a Christian and I don't feel that that's welcome in my Quaker meeting," or "I'm really a non-theist and I don't feel that that's welcome in my Quaker meeting." I once heard both of those things from people who turned out to be in the same meeting. And I thought maybe what's going on there is that we're not talking about it enough. There is something about trying to make spaces in which we feel safe enough to be vulnerable and to share some of those things, often to find out that actually that diversity is welcome, even though we might feel quite cautious around sharing.
That was Rhiannon Grant from the Woodbrook Quaker Learning Center in Birmingham, England. She is the author of the soon-to-be-released Pendle Hill pamphlet, Deep Hospitality. Rhiannon wrote the article, A Family of Friends, Taking Welcome to a Deeper Level. It appears in the May 2024 issue of Friends Journal, and you can also read it at friendsjournal.org.
Okay, let's bring another voice into this conversation about welcome and inclusion. Lisa Grosstein. She's an educator, facilitator, and artist with a Master of Education in Racial Justice Education. Lisa has been teaching in public middle and high schools for 20 years.
Currently, Lisa works as a diversity, equity, and inclusion facilitator and trainer with schools and nonprofits across the Northeast.
When I think about a welcoming space, I think about a space where I can walk in and have some immediate orientation to, am I safe here? Am I going to be able to figure out how I need to be here? Whether that's my home meeting, whether that's somebody else's meeting or Quaker church. If I walk in a meeting door and somebody says, welcome, can I give you some information about our meeting? That's really different than if I walk in the door and say, oh, are you a Quaker? Many people in the US will assume I'm a Quaker because I fit a lot of the demographic norms of what a Quaker looks like. I know for some of my friends of color, that's not their experience walking in the door, and that are you a Quaker can be an assumption of somehow think maybe you don't belong here and be implied. What are all the things we do to make those spaces accessible? That is where we get the deeper work of inclusion. Can people physically access the building? Can they meet their physical and cognitive needs in the way that we're doing programming? And is there space to get whatever accommodations might be needed? Are we acting as if our young people are fully a part of our body, or these kids that are kind of there some of the time? Do we understand that parents of young children, that people who might be in a process of transition or coming out, that people who are grieving or carrying other intense needs might need different care than those of us who are not at one of those stages of life? Are we paying attention to the fact that national events are going to land differently in different ones of us based on the identities we carry? Are we recognizing that some of us might contribute money, some of us might contribute time, some of us might contribute prayer, and some of us might not be in a place to contribute anything, and that all of that is valued? And for each of us, that will probably change over our lifetime. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be really trying and really working. And we have to pause and say, are there voices we're not hearing? Are there people who have left us because they didn't feel welcome here? Are there things I am doing that are not welcoming to others? And how can you help me learn those? And how can I help you learn the places where you might have gaps? And how do we see those moments as acts of faithfulness?
That was Lisa Grosstein in a short excerpt from a much longer Quaker Speak video featuring a variety of voices.
The video is entitled, What's the Difference Between a Welcoming and an Inclusive Space?
You will find this Quaker Speak video and the Quaker Speak channel on YouTube, or visit quakerspeak.com.
As a Universalist friend, she's a part of a group of Quakers who are establishing the Three Rivers Meeting. This is a queer Christian Quaker meeting that gathers online. I've been before. It is a really great community, and we'll have links to their worship and Vespers in our show notes. Each month, Friends Journal writers review books that speak to Quakers today. I'll tell you about 2 recently reviewed books that appeal especially to children and young adults. When I think about historical events, it's often in simple terms. The Supreme Court made gay marriage legal. Abraham Lincoln freed enslaved people. But in those oversimplifications, we forget the enormous amount of work activists do to get us there. Gwen Gosney Erickson reviewed the book More Than a Dream, The Radical March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, written by Youru Williams and Michael G. Long. Quote, 60 years after the event, plenty of information is now available about the 1963 March on Washington. This book delivers more than just the quick facts and quotes centering on Martin Luther King Jr.'s monumental I Have a Dream speech. It opens with Bayard Rustin meeting with his mentor, A. Philip Randolph, to discuss strategy for what would become the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. End quote. Bayard Rustin has popped up, seemingly out of nowhere, in the Quaker consciousness recently. Again, activists, historians, and many, many Quakers have worked to bring his story to all of us. This book is ideal for anyone, especially middle school students. Dr. King envisioned a welcoming and beloved community, which is also illustrated in the children's book Katie Green reviewed, The First Day of Peace, which is written by Todd Schuster and illustrated by Tatiana Gard. Quote, "The story is about two communities, the mountain people and the valley people. A wise and brave mountain girl became aware of hardships among the valley people and called on her community to help them. The valley people reciprocated with gifts from their culture. They told stories and got to know each other. The friendship spread into a day of peace." End quote. The First Day of Peace demonstrates the power of welcome and brings the sometimes abstract idea of peace into focus for our young friends. The full reviews for the books The First Day of Peace and More Than a Dream, The Radical March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom are in the May 2024 issue of Friends Journal, and they're available at friendsjournal.org.
Miche, any big summer plans coming up?
Oh my gosh. Well, I will be at the 2024 Friends General Conference, or FGC gathering, at Haverford College.
Get out. I'm going to be there too.
You are? I'm so excited.
Yeah. No, I knew you were going to be there. But what's your primary purpose for being at Friends General Conference?
My main job will be working at the Earth Care Center, running morning Earth Care Centered worship. What will you be doing there?
Like you, I'll be enjoying the whole thing as well, but also I'll be on the ground as Quakers Today co-host, interviewing people that we meet. As a result of this, our next episode will not be next month, but in 2 months on July 16th. It's a Tuesday. And this way we can include people's voices that we meet. We'll be talking a lot about leadership and what do you do with complicated leaders and historical figures.
Since we're new, do you think we'll have any pieces of paper or something to get people to know our podcast?
Yeah, like little handout things, but we need to be eco-friendly because, right? We're Quakers and that's what we do.
Of course.
I'm thinking I might bring some Quakers Today pins for folks.
Oh, exciting. I will put several of them on my reusable tote bag.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Miche. It's been great all the way from Spain under a blanket chatting with you.
Absolutely. It's been great to see you under something you call a halo.
Yeah, that's right. And I'll get to see you in person for the first time at FGC Gathering. And thank you for joining us for this episode of Quakers Today. If you like our show, please rate and review us wherever you listen to it. Many thanks to everyone who's been sharing Quakers Today with their friends and on social media. We can be found on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Quakers Today is written and produced by me, Peterson Toscano.
And me, Miche McCall. Music on today's show comes from Epidemic Sound.
Season 3 of Quakers Today is sponsored by American Friends Service Committee. Do you want to challenge unjust systems and promote lasting peace? The American Friends Service Committee, or AFSC, works with communities worldwide to drive social change. Their website features meaningful steps you can take to make a difference. Through their Friends Liaison program, you can connect your meeting or church with AFSC and their justice campaigns. Find out how you can become part of AFSC's global community of changemakers. Visit afsc.org. That's afsc.org.
Visit quakerstoday.org to see our show notes and a full transcript of this episode. If you stick around after our closing, you'll hear listeners' responses to the question, what does it mean to be welcomed?
Thank you, friend. It's been great spending time with you today. In a moment, you will hear listeners' responses about what they see, hear, or experience that makes them feel welcome.
But first, we will tell you next month's question. Here it is. Who is a historical figure whom you admire, but whose actions and words also trouble you? Historians, activists, and even content creators have been helping us gain a fuller, more balanced view of often revered historical figures. We're learning that the heroes of old were not perfect.
No, Miche, could you give an example of someone like this?
Absolutely. So last month, we featured Tyche James, who's the head of the recently renamed DC chapter of the Audubon Society. The society was originally named after John James Audubon, a renowned artist known for his realistic drawings of North American birds. His work inspired conservationists to protect birds from being killed for fashion. However, he was also an enslaver, which has only recently become widely known and written about. As a result, the DC chapter dropped the Audubon name and now is calling itself the DC Bird Alliance. Most other chapters and the National Audubon Organization, though, will continue to use his name. According to Jacob Fenston at DCist, quote, board members of the national group decided that the name Audubon is now much more strongly associated with bird conservation than it is with the 19th century ornithologist and artist who originally inspired the organization's name.
Yeah, complicated.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of another complicated historical figure who's a little bit more current from the 20th century, Truman Capote, who was a trailblazer of literature. His nonfiction novel In Cold Blood literally revolutionized the genre of nonfiction. He was also openly gay. He had a lot of courage to be openly gay in a society that had a lot of stigma against homosexuals, as they were called at the time. And although he was really widely celebrated on television and by critics because he had amazing storytelling prowess, he privately struggled with addiction. He had this thirst for fame that he would run over friends. He created lots of foes, and he played fast and loose with facts. So today, as I learn more about his complex persona, Truman Capote is not only a literary icon, but he also is a symbol of the intricacies of human nature and the weight of societal expectations and how they can misshape us and how we can let them overwhelm us.
And so, listener, how about you? Who is a historical figure whom you admire, but whose actions and words also trouble you? Text or leave a message with your name and the town where you live. The number is 317-Quakers. That's 317-782-5377. 317-Quakers. +1 if calling or texting from outside the USA. You can also send us an email. We have these contact details in our show notes over at quakerstoday.org.
Now we hear answers to the question, when you walk into a space, what do you see, hear, or experience that makes you feel welcome? And what might be present that leads you to conclude you may not be welcome?
This month, we received the following message on our Quakers Today TikTok account. At KiruG_official commented, if they ask, why are you here? More than once. Also, if they don't offer you tea and biscuits, you ain't welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a deal breaker. No tea and biscuits? You don't want me,
you
obviously.
You don't want to be here.
Hi, my name is Margaret Wood, and I am answering the query about what makes me feel welcome. I live in a camper van by choice, and I have a home base at a family homestead in Wyalusing, Pennsylvania. Being a lifelong traveler who's migrated twice and lived on 4 continents and now on wheel, welcoming spaces are critical for me, and not just for community, but for safety and my health. And what makes me feel welcome is diversity. My lifestyle is homeless adjacent. If I notice gates or I notice access to public spaces is only available for those who have a smartphone or that there's just a general tone of loud signage that is not informative, but is more there to scare people away or to set boundaries in a fierce power over way rather than power with way, I feel unwelcome. And the other thing that makes me feel welcome is a culture of caring for the space and the land. If there's trash has been picked up, if there's a sense of love and community and people feeling comfortable too, I feel safe. Obviously, things that make me conclude I may not be welcome, mostly I trust my intuition and it tells me that something is off. And generally I can't articulate this, the reason I'm not feeling safe or I'm not feeling welcome for hours later, but I definitely trust my gut now more than I ever did in my life. When I feel that people who are different, people who look different, people who are curious and care are welcome, then I feel welcome. Even though I pass as a perfectly normal older woman that most people do not feel threatened by, it matters to me that a place is open for everybody.
Hi, this is Marcus calling from Jacksonville, Florida. I'm calling because you asked me to. I just enjoyed your podcast, Season 3, Episode 2, and with the Neptune Beach, Florida Quakers. We meet at Neptune Beach near Jacksonville, Florida. And I enjoyed your podcast, and I've added it to my list of podcasts to listen to. Thank you so much.